Problem 10-24 on page F10-24 is a complete statement of cash flows using the direct method. Actually, you're still going to get it easy at this point, since the numbers are provided for you instead of you having to generate the numbers by comparing sequential balance sheets. Once again, the list on F410 will prove invaluable in this exercise. The way to do this problem is to go through the list line by line in the book, identifying in which section each transaction belongs, at the same time identifying whether the transaction is a negative or a positive entry on the form. The first item, purchase equipment for cash of $8,000, matches the first activity listed under cash outflows in the investing activities section of the summary on page F410. You should put an I next to that item on the list, and since the money is going out, a minus to show that it's a cash outflow. The next item is cash sales to customers of $75,000. On the summary on page F410, the first item under cash inflows in the operating activities section relates to this. So you should put an O next to this item and a plus, since this is a cash inflow. The third item, sold Jane Avery Company's stock for cash of $6,000, goes with the first cash inflow in the financing activity section on page F410. Next to that transaction should be an F and a plus, since this is a cash inflow. The fourth item, loaned $1,000 to Denson Company, falls into the investing activities section and the third line under cash outflows. This transaction gets an I and a minus. The next transaction, sold equipment for cash of $1,000, correlates to investing activities cash inflows, the first item, sale of property, plant, and equipment. So this one gets an I and a plus. Paid cash to employees for wages of $4,500 would fall under operating activities cash outflows. Next to this transaction in the book goes an O and a minus. Borrowing $5,000 from People National Bank, rate an F and a plus. On page F410, it's the second cash inflow item under financing activities. The next item, paid cash for merchandise of $32,000, is an O and a minus. It falls under operating activities cash outflows, first item. Paid a $500 cash dividend is under financing activities, the first cash flow item. This transaction gets an F and a minus. Made a loan payment to People's Bank of $1,500, which included $100 interest. This transaction actually has two things happening. The first is the $100 of interest, which falls under operating activities, cash outflows. The second, the balance of the payment, or $1,400, falls under financing activities, last of the cash outflows. The $100 gets an O and a minus. The $1,400 gets an F and a minus. Purchased DuPont Company stock of $2,000. Since this is not DuPont Company, this falls under investing activities, the second cash outflow listed. On the list, this gets an I and a minus. Received cash dividend from DuPont of $100 correlates with operating activities, the third cash inflow, and gets an O and a plus. Paid cash for other expenses of $3,000 correlates with operating activities, to others for operating expenses. This transaction gets an O and a minus. The cash balance at December 31, 2004 is $7,500. This is not a transaction, but will come into play at the bottom of the statement of cash flows. You'll see it when we get there. Now it's time to put the numbers on the form. Due to the constraints put on us by the size of the screen that you're looking at, we're just going to start with the operating section items. As we use them, we will check them off as they are entered onto the form. The first operating item, meaning item with an O next to it, is cash sales to customers. That also has a plus next to it, so it goes on the cash received from customers line on the screen as a positive $75,000. After checking the first item off and moving down the list to the next O item, we see paid cash to employees for wages of $4,500. This has a minus next to it, so it goes on the third line of the form on the screen as a negative $4,500. The next O item is paid cash for merchandise of $32,000. This also has a minus, so on the second line of the form we enter a negative $32,000. Almost to the bottom of the list in the book is a cash dividend from DuPont, and we enter a positive $100 as cash dividend received on the screen. The last O item is the other $3,000 for expenses. Since this is a minus, we enter a negative $3,000 at the bottom of the operating activities section. Oh, we almost missed the $100 of interest for the loan payment that's up a couple of lines on the book. That goes into the form on the interest paid line as a negative $100. I trust you've checked everything off as we went along. Now we'll jump to the lower part of the statement of cash flows down the page and finish filling everything in. The next section of the form is the investing activities section. To complete this section, just the I items on the list in the book should be considered. The first item on the list, purchased equipment for cash of $8,000, goes on the fourth line of the form as a negative $8,000. Continuing down the list, loaned $1,000 to Denson Company also belongs in investing and should be entered as a negative $1,000 on the next line up on the form. Directly under that item on the list in the book is sold equipment for cash of $1,000. This is entered on the form next to the proceeds from the sale of prop and equipment. Of course, prop stands for property, and the number it entered is a positive $1,000. The last entry for investing is most of the way down the list in the book and is purchased DuPont Company stock for $2,000. That transaction goes on the line labeled Net Trans in other companies' stock. Trans, of course, means transactions, and the entry is a negative $2,000. Now I trust that as we move along through the list in the book, you've been checking everything off to be sure nothing is missed. Once again, going down the list in the book, looking for entries into the financing activities section, the first item with an F next to it is sold Jane Avery Company stock for cash of $6,000. On the form on the screen, $6,000 is entered next to sale of common stock. 4 lines down in the book, the transaction says borrowed $5,000 from a bank. The entry on the form is a positive $5,000 on the line labeled borrowings from bank. Down 2 more lines in the book is the transaction paid a $500 cash dividend. This necessitates a negative $500 on the line labeled dividends paid. The last financing activities transaction is the loan payment directly under the cash dividend. Remember that $100 of that payment has already been captured in the operating activities section as interest paid. Therefore, the balance of a negative $1,400 goes on the line labeled payments to bank. The next line down from the financing activities subtotal adds all of the section totals and is labeled net increase, decrease in cash. The line down from that is where the cash at the beginning of the year goes, so $7,500 is entered and the form totals itself with $42,100 of cash at the end of the year. This final number is actually used as a check figure if we were using live numbers and doing a comparison between 2 balance sheets, because this $42,100 should be the ending cash balance for the year. If it is not, something is wrong on the form.